That CPD show. My name is Chris Bright and I'll be your host today. And today I'm joined on the island by Mike Williams. Mike is the location pastor at One Church in Bristol and is the author of the book Dying to Get There, A Vision of Heaven to Transform Our Lives on Earth. Mike is also the head coach of AOG Ministers in Training cohorts that graduates in 2026. I'll read that all again because I read that not how I intended. I'll just remove that one. My name is Chris Bright and I'll be your host today. And today I'm joined on the island by Mike Williams. Mike is the location pastor at One Church in Bristol and is the author of the book Dying to Get There, A Vision of Heaven to Transform Our Lives on Earth. Mike is also the head coach of AOG's Ministers in Training cohort that graduates in 2026. Mike is married to Dani and they have one son, Jackson. Mike, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Fantastic. Well, it'd be good to kind of dive into looking at three resources that you've got with you today, and I'm really excited to look at those. But before we do that, I say this every time, it's not a desert island we're on a desert island. Much better, much classier, I think, than a desert island. I don't want a desert island at all. I want a desert island. Right. And so on this delightful desert island, what dessert have you brought to the island?
Yeah, this came to me straight away. There's lots of desserts that I like, but I have to say Eton mess is my favorite all-time dessert. It has to be the best.
Okay, you're going to have to expand on this one because we've had lots of, claims to the throne, as it were.
Well, that's easy. There is no greater fruit than the strawberry. There is nothing greater than Cornish clotted cream, in my opinion, and add that to a nest of meringue that you can either eat whole or break up into pieces and create a mess, and you surely have heaven in a dish. I cannot think of and if you like to, and I do sometimes do this, you can add Maltesers into the mix and add that little chocolate twist also, and it just is stratospherically good.
Well, I mean, I've never heard of Maltesers being added into that. And now that could be a game changer for the Eton mess. Now, I have some reservations with the Eton mess. I've got to be honest with you. As much as I like it, firstly, I'm skeptical it was invented in Eton. Who in Eton is going to get those meringue nests? I just don't think that's happening.
Do you think there's maybe a connection to Wimbledon's not too far away, and you have strawberries and cream at Wimbledon? It's a very British English thing to do, isn't it? Is to have strawberries and cream. I don't know where the meringue came from.
No, but I do like, because I think the meringue is vital to it. Otherwise, you've just got strawberries and cream, really, isn't it? And I mean, look, let's be honest. With when it comes to the cream, I think you're absolutely right. Clotted cream, we're going Cornish clotted cream here is the greatest cream ever invented by humans.
Oh, the world needs to get on it. It is that good. I've been to a number of different countries, and where I always come back to with England is desserts. Other countries may be able to beat us on some main courses, but when it comes to dessert, England all the way. And at the top of the tree, Eton mess.
Well, I think I could be convinced. I mean, the other problem I've got is, of course, is that I didn't like strawberries until I was probably well into my 20s. So it was one of those things, as a child, I never liked them. And then I realized that I actually did like them. And now I really do like them. So I feel like I've just kind of talked myself into a reason why I should like Eton messes. Probably should be up there. I mean, it's very refreshing, isn't it? It's a refreshing dessert. It's very summery.
And if you ignore the cream and ignore the meringue, strawberries are very good for you. So it's a healthy dessert. That's what I tell myself.
Indeed, they are a very healthy fruit, low sugar, I believe. Unfortunately, all that other sugar that is added on top may slightly swing the balance somewhat. But do you know what? I always like an Eton mess. Whenever it's there, it's always good. It feels, like you said, feels British. And you want to feel like you're in summer watching Wimbledon, having an Eton mess. Yeah, I think that's a good shout. Okay, very, very good. Eton mess. I can be on board with that. Shall we move on to your three resources? We'll go to your first resource. What's your first one?
Yeah, well, I picked these three resources, and there's loads of resources that I've used in my time as a leader and as a minister of a church, over the last 20 years or so. And I was trying to think, how can I possibly pick three? And I picked these three on the basis that they are books, that all three of them are books, and they are books that I keep returning to again and again. So I've read lots of really good books. But these three have been resources for me as a minister and as a leader that I've had so much use out of them, and I could still go back to them today and utilize them. Without further ado, I'll introduce number one. And the first book I picked is a book by a friend of, written by a friend of One Church, actually, by the name of Dave Gilpin. And Dave wrote a book called The Top 10 of Everything. The Top 10 of Everything. And this has definitely been one of my most used books in my office. Just to give you a little bit of a brief as to what it is, it's lots and lots of top 10 lists. But they're all to do with the life of a leader. So top 10 of everything in the private world of a Christian leader, or they might be top 10s of the practical world of Christian leaders. There are top 10 handy hints in the world of Christian leaders. And then there's like top 10 kind of wide world of knowledge of a Christian leader. There's lots of them. I'll give you a couple of examples where I found it super useful. So, for example, number one is top 10 ways a leader can keep fresh, or top 10 ways to avoid being yesterday's leader. Top 10 ways that, or top 10 tests that God might take a leader through. There are lots of these lists throughout the book, and I have found them so helpful for inspiring me to be creative, but also in the teams that I lead to help me build a healthy culture with the people that I'm leading.
Oh, that does sound fascinating. When you said the top 10 of everything, I was reminded, I think I got a book called The Top 10 of Everything when I was about 8. Okay. For Christmas. And so I was kind of expecting it to be one of those books. But it's not. Obviously, this is very much pertaining to the life of leadership. And I think it sounds really fascinating, all these different things. You said it's a book that you come back to. What would what would be those instances where you think, yeah, I want to pick that book up again? What's the kind of environment or the times when that happens?
Sure. Well, the primary place would be in small groups or teams. These are really useful for creating discussions, for getting people to think outside of the box. They're good for training people as well. So while with this book, you really don't get a lot of content in terms of paragraphs, you just get top 10 lists with a sentence with each one. I'll give you another example. This one says top 10 ways to lead a small group. Okay, so if you are in a church capacity, you have a team that you are training, or you have a small group that you're trying to build, this is a great conversation starter to training people on how to lead a small group. And here's a couple of examples in the top 10 list. Try to create a sociable atmosphere. When many groups begin a meeting, the atmosphere freezes over and the meeting finishes when someone says, "Let's begin." So the idea is try and create a sociable atmosphere. Number 2, try to start with everybody saying something. Number 3, try to start with thanksgiving and praise. Number 4, try to avoid prayer times that become morbid times. Number 5, try to quieten the time hoggers. Number 6, try to stick to the golden rule, no preaching. Number 7, try to encourage the growth of the group, and so on and so on. And so you have some really great training in a very simple format of a top 10 list that can help you to train your teams in good leadership. And that's why I keep returning to this book, because there are so many examples in here of ways in which I can start conversations and start training through these simple top 10 lists. Another one I missed was top 10 ways to create a great sermon. I mean, there's a lot of pastors that would need to read that list.
Well, dive into it. Give us the hints. We want to know the answers.
Top 10 ways to create a great sermon. Let me find the page and I will tell you. Here we go. Number 1, What's God been saying to me personally? When you preach, believe that God has chosen you, and there's a good reason for that. Number 2, what's God already been saying to the people? Number 3, what's the theme of my Christian life? Number 4, what are the building blocks of the Christian life? Number 5, what are the needs of the congregation I'm talking to? Number 6, what guidelines or instructions have I been given? Number 7, what passages of scripture burn in me? Number 8, what other things might God want to say to the congregation? Number 9, what season is it in our year? And number 10, what do I want to say? So there's 10 great thoughts that might stimulate you when you're sat in front of your laptop or your Bible or your notepad and you're thinking, how am I going to construct a sermon for the next series or this next week even? Or some of us maybe that are bivocational are thinking, what do I speak about tomorrow? Because it's Saturday and church is tomorrow and I'm speaking. And, you know, if you need that creativity, that little bit of inspiration, it's these kind of tips that have always helped me to go back to the basics and hopefully inspire some creativity in me.
It sounds like one of those books that would be perfect, and I don't want to sound disparaging when I say this, so I mean it in exactly the way it's meant to be taken, but a perfect kind of bathroom book. Do you know what I mean? You know, one of those ones where, I mean, it sounds a bit unhygienic, doesn't it? And it rather is. But, you know, those books, I don't think people really do it anymore, but people used to keep books in their kind of, you know, in the loo. And and be one of those kind of books, basically an easy access book that you can just pick up at any sort of time, and just it'll give you a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of something, you know, whether you're, you know, planning a small group or whether you're planning a preach or whether you're just needing a little spark of something. And that's could be really helpful, those kind of little inspiration books, can't they?
It can be, and as I say, it was a small book. It's a handy little resource. I think I paid maybe £6 or £7 for it, but I keep coming back to it again and again on the bookshelf. And it's really helped me as a leader just to provide that little bit of inspiration to help me construct my team and build our church.
Fantastic. Okay, that's the top 10 of everything by Dave Gilpin. Shall we move on to your second resource? What's the second one you got?
Sure. Well, this one's possibly a little bit well-known book in leadership circles, certainly. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And it's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 or so years old now, I'd imagine, this book. But I have found this to be the most helpful book for working through with teams that I have led. So it's a good book to read, but I find if you all read this, if you're building a team, if you're trying to get a team healthy, you're trying to help your team work together well, to listen to each other, to really work productively, then using this book as an exercise to all read and work through together is one of the most important things I think you can do in leading a team.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've definitely heard of Patrick Lencioni. I've read a few of his books before. I think I've come across this one, but we'd love to sort of dive into some of the dysfunctions. And I think, you know, I think we often know when something's not working in a team, but sometimes diagnosing that can be a little bit of a problem. So should we dive into some of the, what are some of the dysfunctions of the team?
Yeah, so the 5 dysfunctions really that he lists out, and what I love about this book is it's written as a story rather than as a leadership manual. And so you're reading as if this is happening in a particular company, and you're beginning to see these dysfunctions take place. And as you're reading it, you can see so many parallels with perhaps your own team or environments you've worked in before. And he boils the 5 dysfunctions down to, number 1, the absence of trust. So there's a certain invulnerability about the team members, an unwillingness to open up, to really talk, to really trust one another. And that's dysfunction number 1. Dysfunction number 2 is the fear of conflict. So with the fear of conflict, if you don't address it, if you don't speak to it, if you don't try and resolve elephants in the room, you create what's called a kind of artificial harmony, is what Patrick calls it. So there's the sense in which on the surface things look fine, but really under the surface, everybody is not really enjoying this process of working together. So there's the absence of trust, the fear of conflict. Number 3 is just a lack of commitment to the cause, or maybe the cause is a little ambiguous. And so that creates a lack of commitment, but there's a sense in which nobody can really nail their colors to the mast here and say, I am living for this. Number 4 is the avoidance of accountability, which creates the environment for low standards, because nobody's holding anybody to account for particular tasks or objectives or roles or issues that arise. And lastly, an inattention to results. An inattention to results means, the results don't matter, they're not really front and center. We're not really measured well by our objectives. And so I think if you put all of those dysfunctions together in a team setting, if there's an absence of trust, the fear of conflict, the lack of commitment, the avoidance of accountability, and the inattention to results, the chances of any team in any environment, including church, actually accomplishing much is obviously really unlikely. And you find those teams break down quite quickly relationally, or just don't achieve. And so that, we have to restructure the company or restructure the church to be able to try and get the results we want. But at the heart of it may just be some dysfunctions that are actually quite easily solved.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up on the conflict one, because I think that's something that probably doesn't come naturally to churches. I think that as churches, I think we often think conflict equals bad, and obviously we want to be people that are honoring of each other, but also the people that we serve and the people that lead us as well. And so it can make conflict quite difficult. What does Lencioni talk, how does he talk into that, and how do you think we can apply that into the context of church? That how can we do conflict well in church?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, there's some golden rules. I think Lencioni picks up on these. I certainly have tried to work this out in my own team leadership, is that there are ground rules that are set out from the very beginning of the project or objective that you are trying to work on as a team. Those ground rules hopefully include things like the respect for one another, the ability to talk honestly, and you're looking to try and do that in a way that isn't heated, or I would call it like a high stakes environment where you're putting everything on the line emotionally, physically, mentally into that situation. It's become a high stakes scenario, and in high stakes scenarios you can end up creating division and offending and hurting each other. I find it's far better to try and talk things through in a low stakes environment, a place where perhaps the emotions are not running high, where you acknowledge each other's feelings, where you have respect for each other's positions, but you're able to talk about the situation in a really productive way, possibly with somebody else in the room who's objective, or some mitigation or mediation. But there's a sense in which there are spaces for safety to be able to address slightly awkward or difficult scenarios that come up in the life of a team. And if everybody understands that, and everybody agrees to that, I think that there can be progress. You cannot, obviously you can't mitigate for every individual, every person. Not everybody is perhaps mature or able to thrive in those kind of honest environments. But you, as a leader, I think can create the environment, a safe environment for conflict in a productive way.
Yeah, I think that conflict is vital, and whenever we I think we've already all seen environments, or even you just see them on TV, those kind of environments where if no one's allowed to disagree, then actually you think, well, aren't we all getting on? But actually in reality we're not, because you can't actually be honest, and it's where that honesty is where things thrive. No, that's really good. The other thing I want to pick up on you is that thing about results. I think that can be sometimes quite difficult for churches to grapple with, because there's that thing about, we don't want to be a numbers driven organization as a church. You don't want to be driven by the numbers, but also actually getting results is a vital part of a team. So how can churches, or how have you done it in your context, work that through where you strive towards results, but it's not just all about numbers?
For me, I would say it was a tension. By tension, I mean neither is wrong. People are important, and I think achievements or results are important. And I don't think it's a false dichotomy to say one is important and the other isn't. And there are scenarios and times where one might be more important than another. There are times when people are more important than results. But I also think there are times when results are actually really important, and we need to acknowledge that. So within a church setting, it's really navigating with your people what in each individual project or objective that you are chasing after, what's really important here? What are we measuring here? What results do we want here? Or what impact do we want to see in the lives of people here? Or what culture do we want to create in our organization with this project? And so I don't think you can separate them out and say it's always this or always that. I think there probably be a mixture of both in any organization, in particular church. But even in a non-church context, results are not all important at the expense of people, because people are either the people you work with, or they're your customers, or they're the people you're trying to reach with your product. And so what you're going to want to do is understand that tension of creating a people safe environment, but also chasing after some really good results at the same time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. So that's the 5 dysfunctions of a team by Patrick Lencioni. Should we go on to your final resource?
Sure. So the final resource that I keep going back to and utilizing, this is perhaps more personal than the other two, which really helped me with team and training, but this one has been for me, is a book by Timothy Keller called Preaching. Now, for those of you who know Timothy Keller, he is, in my opinion at least, one of the greatest orators in Christian circles in the last generation, and sadly passed away last year. But wrote a number of books and was exceptionally gifted and well skilled in the area of public preaching. And not just within a church context. Tim Keller was a speaker at places like Google and others, other environments outside of church circles that would bring him in to speak about issues because he had such a good way of communicating.
So let's dive into that book, and what are some of the nuggets of gold, or some of his process that you've learned from?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things I really loved about the way that Tim would speak is he was really able to identify not just what's happening in society and what's happening in the world, but he would identify the philosophical worldview, the motivations, and the, if you like, the ideas underlying the society, what society was experiencing or going through. That really challenged me. And what he was able to do was then contextualize the Bible and the Bible worldview and the life of Jesus and the things the Bible says into that kind of culture. I've not heard many people do it as well as Tim did it. And so what you get in this book is a whole chapter on what Tim learned about preaching to the culture. So to learn his, if you like, tips and tricks of the trade, if you like, the idea of here's how you effectively communicate to the world that you're living in. Here's how you stay relevant. Here's how you connect with people by help them to see the cultural ideas that they're immersed in, and then to show why that cultural idea is not working, and then to contrast that with here's what the Bible says about that, and show them the way to Jesus through that kind of methodology. I really found that very useful. And in this book, he really digs into the how he does that, which I think every preacher should read.
I mean, it does sound absolutely fascinating. I remember doing a bit of research on Timothy Keller's method. I haven't read that book, but his methodology, and the amount of time that he would take to hone his message. He would take a passage and then start with the Bible study, then turn that Bible study into a preach, and then hone that preach. And he's I think the first thing that I've noticed from initial research is just the time that he takes on that, and then, like you said, it's the speaking to culture thing that seems to be so fascinating. How has that, being able to speak to culture, how has that changed your own preaching?
Yeah, I think it has deepened the way in which I go about a subject. So now I'm not just asking the question, what does the Bible say about this topic or this topic? I'm also asking the question, what is the dominant message that our culture is believing about this topic or this subject? And then I'm contrasting the two, or I'm asking questions now that go beyond just the I guess the Christian worldview of that topic. I'm asking, well, what are the audience, what are the world seeing or believing or thinking about this topic? I found that a really useful approach to speaking, because it immediately helps me to connect with the people in the pew or the people that I'm trying to reach. It helps me to understand, hey, here's what you've been told, or here's what you think, or here's how society has developed this particular view. And then here's why that view does not work, or here's why that view stumbles, or here's why that view isn't helping, or why it's not fulfilling us. And here's the Bible alternative. And this is what this story that I'm picking out in this passage is trying to tell us. And so that's deepened the way in which I approach a subject and made it, I think, more user-friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever I listen to great preachers, I'm not a preacher myself, but I do enjoy listening to preachers, and which is helpful. And I think the best preachers that I hear always, they can take something that's very everyday, and they unmask that viewpoint, and they unmask that how you think about something and how you approach something, and they kind of unmask the world's view and then rebuild it with a kind of a biblical Jesus-centered worldview. And I think that's fascinating how that's done. I think that's something that I think Tim Keller does so well. Is there anything else in the book that's beyond? Is it just around the cultural piece? Does he dive into anything else in terms of like practical bits about how to word things or how to structure things? How else does he help people unpack preaching?
Yeah, another really great a chapter that I enjoy about this book is a chapter called "Preaching the Gospel Every Time." And so here in this chapter, he really it breaks down how in whatever topic you might be speaking about, it's about, he gives some tips and some ways of drawing those topics back to the good news of the gospel and Jesus Christ in every single sermon. And so he will, I don't think I've ever heard Tim preach or speak in a way that hasn't ultimately led to Jesus Christ. And it's gone beyond, sometimes in church life, we will speak about a topic and to our shame, not even mention Jesus, or not even mention the everything leads back to him, and everything leads back to what he has accomplished for us. And I find this chapter really quite challenging to me as a speaker, to always remember to bring every topic, every message back to this point of, hey, this all centers in Jesus, this all leads to Jesus, this is all made possible through Jesus, and ultimately giving our hearers and those that will come and listen to us an opportunity to respond ultimately to Jesus Christ, not just to the topic we've spoken about, to respond to the person of Jesus, not just the things that Jesus might teach or think about. So I think involving Jesus Christ in every message is now something I work really hard on as a speaker, and this was quite instrumental in that.
Yeah, and it automatically, I think, it will be harder or easier depending on the passage that you're preaching from. But that's the work of preaching. And there'd be something that you might know better than myself. Was Tim Keller, was he more sort of expository, sort of that kind of verse by verse approach, or did he do more sort of theme by theme? What was his approach to preaching?
Yeah, certainly I'm not an expert in Tim Keller's particular ministry, but the times that I'd listened to him, he was, I would say he was quite expository. He would take a text, and that would be the particular text would be the basis of that message, rather than a topic. Say, for example, I don't know, prayer. That wouldn't be the way that I hear Tim going about his preaching. He would start with the text, and then he would look at really, as I've just described, he would talk about, what does this text mean? What does that look like in our culture? What is Jesus pointing us towards? That would really be the approach that I see Tim taking more often than not.
Yeah, and it's certainly an approach that it was able to speak to hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world, and starting with the text, applying that to culture and unmasking the culture, but then pointing people to Jesus. And it's certainly has it has been, and his preaching will continue to be something that has affected many people. But his approach is something that certainly in this book it seems like we can clearly learn from.
Sure. I mean, he's written lots of other good books as well. And I'd point you to the Reason for God, I think it's called, and he does a great talk on that at Google to all the employees there in California, I think it is, isn't it? That is an excellent apologetic for the Christian faith, and also well worth a watch.
Fantastic. So that is Preaching by Tim Keller, and you could probably say that that Preaching by Tim Keller becomes the meringue, with the 5 dysfunctions probably the cream, and obviously the top 10 of everything must be the strawberries. That making this Eton mess of a podcast. I'm not calling it a mess. I'm calling it an Eton mess of a podcast. So I think it's those 3 resources work wonderfully well together. So yes, brilliant. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed hearing about those 3 resources, and also hearing about your love for Eton mess. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'm sure I'll catch you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.